Shalom. So I am here with Luke Thompson, my arch nemesis, who's wrong all the time because he's actually one of these Christians who actually defends the Trinity as a good thing. So we're going to have a discussion. It's probably going to go over all over the place, but I wanted to start by having you explain, because a lot of times, when PVK is saying things, you'll say, well, that's monism versus dualism versus the Trinitarian vision. And it's like, I'm not very clear what you mean by that. And I think most people don't know at all what you mean by that. So what's this Trinitarian vision you tell us of?
Well, okay. So the Trinitarian vision, the vision aspect of it has a lot more to do about probably specifically modes of consciousness. So there's ways that you can frame it. When I'm talking about like monism and dualism and Trinitarianism, those are almost more like you could almost call it just like base reality frames of a kind of metaphysic or ontology.
Those are a lot of big words, Luke.
Sorry. So right. So it's just like people talk about base reality a lot, and the basic kind of modern materialistic view is that base reality is made up of some stuff, some material substance, and people used to call it like, this is where we got the idea of like elementary particles, the periodic table of the elements. These were the elementary particles that made up base reality. These things, or combinations of these things, make up everything that we see, right? But then we got into subatomic particles with protons, neutrons, electrons, and then we have you get down into like quarks and bosons and phasons and all these different things.
So what does that have to do with the Trinity?
So that basically, though, so materialism, that view that base reality is just made up of substances, is a form of monism. It's a form of saying that all of reality is composed of just this material stuff. It's just stuff. Or like within Buddhism, they could say that all of reality is basically illusory. All material reality is illusory. And I don't even know what they would say that it is. It's just like, because basically enlightenment is transcending the suffering that doesn't really exist, and you reach nirvana, right? But it's all like there isn't or you can form into like forms of dualism, which like the most basic one is Cartesian dualism, mind-body dualism. So there's body, there's materiality, but then there's also this mind stuff. So that's a form of dualism. And then Trinitarianism, I would argue, is that the easiest way that I frame it is it's basically another way to talk about the base of reality is relational. It's not a mere substance. It's this relational dynamic. And the easiest way to almost frame that is that you can have dualisms, light and dark, good, bad, hot, cold, whatever, any sort of dualism, any sort of contrast. But in order to have a dualism, those have to be within some kind of transcendent matrix to even see the difference between the two. There has to be something, like if you were to put like a black and a white on a sheet of paper, like these two opposite things, the paper has to be there to exist to show the contrast and the difference between the two things. And that is like a third thing to differentiate between the two. And so that's almost like,
so you're adding nuance more than one, viewing things in one way, viewing them in two. You're looking at a third dimension of everything, I guess.
It's basically so like the dualism and then the matrix that holds dualism is like a logical way to talk about it. But you could also talk about it in terms of like relationality, that anything, you could get into this with consciousness, and I don't know how far down any of these rabbit trails we want to go, but like this is kind of like the hard problem of consciousness, that in order for perception to happen, there needs to be a communicator and then a perceiver. You need both of those things for reality to happen. So this is like the famous George Barclay quote, like, if a tree falls in a forest and is anyone there to hear it, doesn't make a sound.
Right.
Which to most people who aren't in philosophy, they're just like, well, that's, and if you're a materialist, you'd be like, well, that's ridiculous, because there are sound waves and it's there, and of course, like, there's vibrations, and so there is a sound, but there's just no one there to hear it. But that is, I mean, you can't ever know that empirically or scientifically, because it's unobservable. If there's nobody there to hear it, it's not making a sound. And so it's basically just the idea that anything, all existence exists within relationality. So like for you and I to communicate, there needs to be a me, there needs to be a you, and then there has to be some kind of bridge between the two things that is allowing us to even communicate. There's something happening between you and I that's even allowing us to have a conversation, in as much as that is happening.
So that is your analogy to Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit connecting the two, I guess?
Well, so within like within Trinitarian theology, and I mean, it gets to be really hard to talk about, and this is like even within intra-Trinitarian debates, things become complicated, because even like Nate, who's a common friend that we have on the Discord, is we have these conversations a lot of like the differences between monarchical and egalitarian Trinitarianism, which you probably know a little bit of through conversations with Sam and listening.
It's all polytheism to me.
Yeah. So I mean, some of those things, I mean, there's differences in the way that those pan out. I actually think egalitarian Trinitarianism doesn't make any sense. So we could probably relate on that. But within my understanding of Trinitarian stuff, and I mean, it becomes complicated to talk about, but the Father is like the inexpressible. One way that I've said it before, I mean, it's an analogy. Nothing's perfect. But the Father is like the inexpressible mind. So like, even if you think about it yourself, like your thoughts in your head are not, and even before your thoughts, your pre-verbal thoughts, the things that you don't even have articulation for, they can find no manifestation or expression until you even put language on them. And then you put the language on them, and that gives them a body, a form, a shape. So that could be Father, Logos, Father, Son. The Son is the manifestation of it, and the breath is the thing that carries the word. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, so I have many problems with this, but the first one is, where's the limiting principle? Because I could make a great argument for 4, right? So sorry about that. I could make a great argument for 4 instead of 3, right? So we could talk about the 4 elements, or you talk about the relationship, right? There's the 2, and then there's the relationship, but then there's time, or there is the locus within all of that. So I don't see how this is in any way biblical, first of all. Second, I don't see how, what's the limiting principle? Because people accuse the Kabbalah of having 10 gods, because you can talk about the 10 characteristics of God, which we do, right? And I could make an argument for basically any number. There are no bad numbers in Judaism, right? Well, we make arguments for the greatness of every number, but how is this Trinity something special, something, adding nuance, describing things in more ways makes great sense to me. Sure. I'm against monism, just like I'm against dualism as I'm against Trinitarianism, because ultimately there is one God. All of it has to mesh. That is the genius of the monotheistic vision, is that whereas no matter how many ways you break it up, it all has to come together.
Yeah.
And that's the monotheism. That's the important part, that it all comes together, and that God being at the pinnacle of the hierarchy. So if you view things in terms of 10 ways or 4 ways or 3 ways, God is that which unites and is bigger than and is greater than all of it. So that's why that number one, which is something that the Bible constantly hammers home. I mean, I've been doing on this channel, I've been doing the Shema, right? And I started off by quoting Jesus in all 3 of the synoptic gospels, right? He's like, it's the first commandment, right? And so I don't see this abandonment of the number one as something unique and special, the way that the Bible teaches us that the number one is God's name, in a way that, you know, it says on that day, right, the day of the consummation, when the Messiah comes, Yihye Hashem Echad, God will be one and his name will be one, right? So, and the Bible hammers on this number one so much. I just don't see where you get this 3 and how it's in any way better than 2 or 4 or 5, and why, where you get it and why it's so special.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, a lot of it is, so for me, I wouldn't say that it's primarily logic. I mean, I think, you know, to me, it makes sense, and obviously doesn't make sense to you, but part of that is, I think, most certainly just having to do with our different upbringings and contexts. And so, you know, I've been taught.
What makes more sense to me is you as an Eastern Orthodox being like, okay, so this is what I've been taught, but
Yeah.
like, you know, a sola scriptura Protestant, I don't understand. I don't understand how they at all, like, what's the.
Well, so I mean, I can wear that hat too, because I was a Protestant for a long time, and I mean, and I could try to, you know, argue points for the Trinity from Scripture. I mean, I recently listened to and you've maybe listened to this, because this gets thrown around the Discord a lot, but the Lord of Spirits podcast.
I've listened to some of their stuff. I was very impressed by how little they misrepresented Judaism.
Okay, well, that's cool. But I recently listened to a podcast on theirs, and I mean, I don't know, there's stuff. So they had a podcast on, does God have a body? And it was a really fascinating podcast. There was a lot in there, and they teased a lot of things, because it's just, the whole thing was such a big subject, they couldn't cover it all. And so they're like, I know you're gonna have a question about this, and we'll cover that later, and you're gonna have a question about this, and we'll cover that later. So it was, I mean, there was a lot of good substance in there, but it was also a little bit of a teaser. And I don't know, I probably wouldn't even, at the end of the day, I probably wouldn't even talk about it in the exact same way that they would. I don't know. You know, it's one of those things, like, I'd probably have to sit down and have a conversation with them. And and obviously these guys are, I mean, they're way more well-read and studied than I am. So, I mean, I'm just, in as much as I know now, I would just be like, that doesn't make sense to me. So, but they were talking about God having a body. And so a couple things. You kept saying that God is one, and, the Shema. And I would agree with that. So I mean, I would know. So as far as I understand the Hebrew, like, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," right? That is, that word could be translated. I mean, and I've been told this, like, one or unity or, um, I mean, this is the thing about Hebrew. Like, I feel like Hebrew as a language, any ancient language, is so super condensed that, like, we have all this. In more modern languages, we have all this precision and, like, extrapolation of languages. It's like a tree, going out, where we have all these branches and we have all these things. But in Hebrew, it gets back down to, like, this one word that contains, the multiplicity of what all these other words that we have in these more modern languages. And I feel like that word is one of those words that contains a lot of things. And so it's because everything that you were talking about when you were riffing, that God, the unity, God is the unity that holds everything together. What I kept thinking of is, like, yes, I was agreeing with all that. And this is like the whole unity and multiplicity thing that I'm talking about, that we talk about often, is I think at the base level of understanding our experience as human beings, and this is probably, like, logically the easiest way, apart from revelation, like, this is what I've been handed from the church and the Trinitarian theology, is that I think you have to make sense as a person of two things: unity and multiplicity. We have difference, we have different people, there's you and there's me, but there's some commonality that is allowing it. Like, there's a unity between us that allows us to be in communion. There's a unity between me and a rock that allows us to be in communion, to have a relationship, to have interaction. There is a transcendent unity that holds all things together in common, which, I mean, this gets into panentheism. This is the, I mean, the way that I would frame it is, this is the God in everything. That is the God that in all of creation, that is not equivalent to God, but it is I mean, within church, I think we would call it, everything is an image of God. It's a reflector of God. There's a manifestation of God that is not, it's not equivalent to God. I mean, it's not the same as God. This is different than pantheism. God isn't just like the summation of the cosmos. That's not what we think God is. But there is something in him we live and move and have our being, as the great Saint Paul, quoting the Stoics, said. So there is something, I mean, in my understanding within Christian theology, is that those are like, and Sam went into this on one of his podcasts with our buddy Hank, going into the church fathers. I think it was on Justin Martyr, and I think this idea maybe either originated with Justin Martyr, but it's like and I don't know the Greek as well, but the, like, logoi spermaticus or whatever it was. So logoi sperms, logos sperms that are present in everything. And I think this is the way that my basic understanding of Christian theology is that everything that exists essentially holds its being around logos sperms that essentially are like, it's not something that's material, but it's the thing that holds everything together. This is like how Peugeot would call it. Anything that is held together by something, and that is like a logosperm. That is a manifestation of the transcendent, ineffable, incommunicable God, the Father.
So, I mean, I think the name Plotinus needs to be brought up here.
Okay.
Because Neoplatonism,
Yep.
I mean, so what a lot of people don't know is that Neoplatonism is that funny philosophy nobody talks about, which all Orthodox Judaism, Orthodox Christian, lowercase or Orthodox Christianity, and lowercase Orthodox Islam all agree on, right? So this Neoplatonic idea, which, yeah, I mean, you were very much describing it, and I mean, some of the people I've heard many times, people will say that the Kabbalah is Neoplatonic because of, you know, the panentheism and all that. But what seems to me to differentiate Christianity from Judaism and Islam is, you know, we don't care about the number 10 or the number 7 or any of the other, you know, and it comes down to that one. And of course, people will make that argument. I mean, there's a reason why my channel is about learning Hebrew, because I think that honestly, if you're serious about the Bible, I think you almost have an obligation to try to engage it, not through interpretation, but directly. Because interpretation, as good as it may be, is one person's understanding of, you know, this divine text.
Yep.
And so, I mean, I don't want to get into a whole thing about that number 1 and precisely. It's just the number 3 really grates on me because look, it's, you know, the Bible, my Bible is very, very clear. And what was shocking to me is that the Christian Bible is also very clear that the number 1 in relation to God is special, holds a special place. And then suddenly this Trinity, this number 3 persons in one, has become an important part of Christianity. And vast majority of Christians don't even bother to try to defend it, right? Yeah. You do bring it up, and you know, in that little discussion you and Julian and Nate were having, you guys were all kind of like semi-dunking on Sam. Oh, Sam's just plain wrong, you know, 333. Of course 3. Right?
I was defending Sam because I said explicitly, I think there are points where Sam, even propositionally, because Nate makes this point, which I also agree with, that like what you propositionally assent to is somewhat irrelevant as long as you're living into the patterns, the proper patterns of being, which I think is very true. So, however, I think,
is the Trinity central to Christianity? If you deny the Trinity, do you cease to be a Christian?
Now propositionally?
I don't define it however you want to define it. Christianity, 99% of Christians will say, if you don't believe in the Trinity, you're not a Christian.
Yeah, but that gets into the bigger debate that we have just without end in this little corner of the internet, and that Jordan Peterson was having with Sam Harris and all that. Like, what do you mean by believe? And act as if belief versus just like logical assent to a set of abstract facts.
But there is a core to Christianity. There has to be some limiting factor of, okay, this person is a Christian and that person is not.
Yeah.
And it certainly seems a lot of Christians will define that as the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? That's this important thing. Yet I can't find legitimate, you know, I can't find anybody who is actually defending it in any way that they themselves It's like, yes, you may be able to find theologians. Maybe I haven't encountered Christians who like actually believe this is really important to them. Except in that video, the three of you seemed to be saying, oh, no, this is important.
Yeah, well, I take your point, and I think it's valid. I think that's true. But there's a lot of, so first off, I would say thank God that our salvation isn't contingent upon our right assent to all of the correct information. I just don't think that's how salvation works. This is where like Paul will often talk about this, and Jeff and Paul had a conversation about this once, like, what is a Christian? And Paul will often say, like, what does he say? A Christian is someone who
trusts Jesus more than he trusts himself.
Right. Which,
and my response and my comments in his video when he said that was, oh, you know what Jesus says is the first commandment?
Yeah. So, so a lot of this is, so to answer your question just for myself is, do I think belief in the Trinity matters? Yes. But I think belief, this gets into a lot of my big intellectual project in this corner of the internet, is I think belief is something that's much different than just the ideas that are in your head.
So how does the Trinity manifest? Like,
well, so back to that whole thing of like relationality and monism, dualism, Trinitarianism, because I would posit that the deepest level of being is relational, is personal. Like, I don't think the deepest level of reality is stuff. I don't think we live in a world of objects. I think we live in a world of relationships. And I think how that manifests then is this is probably the easiest way to say it, and it's got a very deep profundity to it, because God is love.
Okay.
And I think that's what it is. So like, if you and Jesus said this kind of stuff all the time, and it's all over the New Testament. Saint James talked about this stuff. Like Saint Paul. So listen, I know you have your issues with Saint Paul.
No, I don't reject things just because Paul said them.
Well, that's good. I know. But, yeah. So like, I love, so like the first letter to the Corinthians is one of my favorite epistles in the New Testament. It's one of my favorite writings of all time. I just think it's top to bottom brilliant.
So how does that speak about the Trinity? How does the First Corinthians talk about the Trinity?
So, to your question, like to break it down to the level of three thing and that logic, I think it makes it, you're getting into abstractions, but I think the most simple way is that, like St. Paul says in I think chapter 8, something like that, but like, if anyone, I should just look it up so I don't misquote it, but if anyone thinks he, I just don't want to say it wrong, because I thought I had this committed to memory at one point, and I always say it wrong. So
it's the verses I want to quote the most, which I can never remember when I want to quote them.
Yeah. So this is 1 Corinthians 8, and he's talking about food sacrificed to idols, and he says, now concerning things sacrificed to idols, we know that all have knowledge. Knowledge makes arrogant, but love edifies. If anyone supposes that he knows anything, he is not yet known as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by him. And so, to answer your question probably most simply, and this isn't going to satisfy you in like a logical three thing. I think we can talk about that and break it down philosophically too. But anyone who loves believes the Trinity. That's what I would say.
Explain.
So so God is this. So God, most fundamentally, even in the scripture, says God is love.
I have no problem with the idea God is love.
Right. And so, and by this we know that God loves us, that John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. So love is seen as this, I think, this overflowing. So I mean, and kind of even within a Neoplatonist tradition, that's kind of the understanding of it, is God is this utterly transcendent, unrepresentable, pure spirit that is essentially, I mean, and this is like the paradox. He's like the beyond manifestation. There is no representation of him. You can't make um an idol of him. He is beyond representation.
Okay.
And then, but then somehow mystically that is represented in creation. Christians would say fully in Jesus Christ. And so, but that overflow, that the act of creation itself is love, is a manifestation of one thing. This is unity and multiplicity, the Father overflowing into multiplicity that
Mhm.
is not equivalent with him, and love is the communion between those things. That thing that I was talking about before, when we're talking
I agree with you completely. This is the Jewish concept. The word ahava, love in Hebrew, has a root hav, which means to give,
okay,
right? And so the concept is that God, being love, had to give, right? Which necessitated creation of that which is other, so
yeah,
that God could give.
yeah,
But then in that case, the Trinity is even worse, in my opinion,
okay,
because if you're saying that Jesus is God, then God is no longer loving the other, he's loving himself, and he becomes a narcissist.
yeah. Well, but this gets into the technical, like, this is where all this, and I mean, I understand, like, this is stuff that's hard because you are not even, I mean, you're not a self-professing Christian, and even this is like in this intramural debate within Christianity. This is where
Okay, I let me confess to you. I I look at the word Christian and I'm like, I actually said this today.
okay,
Jesus says, if you knew Moses, you would know me.
mm-hmm,
And I hear that and I weep
mm,
because, and I'm serious, it brings
yeah,
me to tears,
yeah,
because I feel that because people who call themselves Christians don't know Moses, they don't recognize Jesus at all.
mm,
So I'm I don't go around calling myself a Christian, but I look at self-professed Christians and I'm like, dude, the Jesus you're talking about is not the Jesus I see.
mm,
The Jesus I hear, so it's like, if the word Christian means somebody who believes that Jesus was teaching God's, was living an anointed life as God, as a manifestation of godliness on earth,
mm-hmm,
I aspire to be a Christian.
yeah, yeah,
But again, for me, it goes back to that line where Jesus says, if you knew Moses. And vast majority of Christians, Moses isn't even in the picture.
yeah. No, I agree. I think there's a huge lack there in a lot of the Christian church and their teaching. And I mean, and it's something that I even have recognized that I think I think within, like, the more ancient Christian traditions, you get a lot more of that stuff. Like within Orthodoxy and Catholicism, there's a lot more of it, but it becomes so um I mean, I don't know. A lot of Orthodox teachers like Father Bear will talk about this all the time. And people say this, but they kind of give it lip service. In the New Testament, when people are talking about the scriptures, or like even John Bayer, when Jesus appears in the upper room and he opens the scriptures to them, like, that wasn't like St. Paul, that was, that was Moses. So I agree with you. There's not there's a huge deficiency there in myself and in a lot of the church. I think I think there's I mean, the more that I've come to even understand Judaism through you or the Kabbalah or anything, like I don't even, because see, ultimately at the end of the day, and part of this is just my temperament, I suppose. But like even I say this with Sam too all the time, is I appreciate the dialogue and the communications that I've had with him, the disagreements, the debates we've had, and I've learned a lot of things from Sam. I've learned a lot of things from you, and really, ultimately, at the end of the day, I don't know, and this actually fits within my Christian theology. I mean, I should also say I'm a universalist and I'm a perennialist of a sort. So like we could flesh that out.
You're always wrong. Okay.
Yeah. that will trigger a lot of people, I'm sure. But I think like Thomas Merton said this, and I think it's true, is that there's a true and a false self. And I think this is true in the scriptures and in Christian tradition too. There's the true you is the you that is the image, and the New Testament calls it Christ in me. It's that image of God in me that is the true me, that isn't the bent and broken part of me that is constantly missing the mark. So Merton calls it like we have a true and a false self. And all that to say is like I think you and I, your true self and my true self don't disagree about this.
Well, I mean, at some point, like you've noticed my background, right? That is the tetragrammaton in the shape of a man, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that we are made in the image of God, and this is one of the things I say a lot, is I have no problem with the idea that God is incarnate in human beings who are able to portray the image of God. That's not Christianity. That's Genesis 1.
That's fine. That's all of my, that's pretty much all of my theology right there. And I just think Jesus did that perfectly.
Okay, so but if Jesus did that perfectly, then I mean, you mentioned earlier like this idea of Jesus after. So when I mentioned this to some people, they're like, they don't believe me, but there is this Christian idea that before the crucifixion, Jesus was teaching things that pertain to the Jews, and then he was crucified and resurrected, and so the teachings of Jesus after that and the teachings of Paul are more important, and so I feel like there's a lot of nullification of Jesus as a person. The Gospels, right? Is Christianity centered around the Gospels or the epistles of Paul? And it seems to me that no, the famous line, Christianity is the religion about Jesus. It's not the religion of Jesus. And honestly, to me, one of the reasons I call Paul Baal of Tarsus is I feel that he's completely displaced Jesus as the focus, right? As the focus of Christianity. What's his name? Anselman, right? So he never once quotes Jesus, right? he talks about me hating Jesus and like my
You guys have
hatred for,
beef?
yeah, of course.
Okay.
In the comments section, of course.
Okay.
Especially me being who I am. And
Mhm.
my whole thing to him is, but I quote Jesus and you don't. And he doesn't. I have yet to see this man quote Jesus. Right? And it's like,
Yeah.
quote some Jesus to me, right? The Jesus that I have experienced by reading the Gospels and looking for Jesus, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's not who Christians portray to me.
You mean in the way that they talk about him, or in the way that they live? Both?
And the way they talk about him, the way they live, and the way they talk not just about him, but about the topics that he spoke about, right? So you could not possibly, I think if you went up to a Jew anywhere in the world and you said, okay, what did Jesus say is the first commandment? None of them would believe you if you said, he said it's "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one." None of them would believe you. And it's in the book of Luke.
Yeah.
Right? Because if and generally, you know, if you ask what's Jesus's great commandment, right? To love, love others as you love yourself. Well, no, actually, what he says is the first is to love the Lord your God, right? The Shema, and the second is like it, right? And it's like, I'm quoting the Gospels here. And what I'm saying in quoting the Gospels is the opposite of everything Christians have ever told me about Jesus.
So what would you say? I mean, I don't know, and it maybe will be hard to answer this, to summarize it, because I get a feeling that it's more of just like a general, it's a general feeling. And I feel, I think what you're saying, I get the sentiment, but like, what would you say, or how have Christians portrayed and spoke of Jesus in a way that is opposed to that, or different than that, or more Pauline focused then?
Oh, so the whole thing. Well, first of all, that loving each other, like, well, okay. First thing, Jesus calls himself Son of Man far more times than he calls himself Son of God. Yet, Son of God, right? And Jesus is quite adamant about how important it is to keep the commandments and how great the law is.
Yeah.
And Christians are like, no. Jesus did away with all of that, right? And I mean, it's just one thing after the other. Paul's whole faith-based thing is not very Jewish at all, right? And for example, you know that place where the rich man comes to Jesus and says, how can I earn my way, right?
Yeah, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Yeah.
And what's the answer?
He says, well, he essentially says to him, I love this passage too, by the way. Like what does Moses say?
That's the thing. People automatically jump, right? He says, keep the commandments, right? Yeah. And he mentions the 10 commandments, and the guy says, I've always kept those. And then Jesus says, give away your wealth and follow me. And
yeah, I love it, because he says, I talked to my priest about this passage, and this is a little bit of an aside, but I love it. Because he said, yeah, exactly right. He says, like, what are the commandments? What did Moses say? And he's like, I've kept these things since my youth. And Jesus said, and then what's interesting is Jesus said, great, good. Essentially, and then the guy, the rich young ruler then said, yes, but still, what do I lack? So he asked again, he pushed further.
Right.
Because he essentially said, Jesus, what must I do? And Jesus is like, do these things. And he's like, I've done those. And Jesus is like, cool, you're good. And then he said, but what do I lack? And Jesus said, okay, sell all your goods and give them to the poor. And what my priest told me this, and I think this is a brilliant expression of something that I think is very true. I mean, I would say within Christianity, but I mean, it's probably true within Judaism too, is that there are commandments, but but there's also there's an individual personal aspect to it where this guy, the rich young ruler had fulfilled the commandments, and Jesus was like, that's great, you're fine. But then there was something in him, something very personal to him, where he was like, it's not enough. It's not okay. I'm not satisfied with that. And so Jesus was like, okay, go to the next level, sell everything you have and give to the poor then. But it's not, I think the problem where people get is they want to take that personal message of Jesus and universalize it and say this is prescriptive for everyone. No, it's not.
It's beyond that. Look, I think a lot of Christians want to do what Paul did, which is say that no man is good and no man keeps the commandments and nobody is good enough for God and everybody's going to
If you want to
hell.
rag on Calvinism, I'll be your buddy. We can do it.
But this idea that by the law we are cursed, right?
Yeah.
And this hatred for the law, that it's just so repugnant that I fail to keep the law. Yes, I do, but I cry about that.
Right.
So I don't know if you watch.
So here, but sorry, not to just a quick thing, but you wouldn't say, I think this is the concern that people have, and I think this is probably a straw man. I think the Christian concern is this kind of, or a lot of these people that you're talking about, the concern is that people who believe that it's the whole justification by works, that you're saved by works, that you think that you are going to be saved by your adherence to fulfilling the law.
Well, okay, so there's two parts to that. Of course, it's wrong to say kochi ve'osem yadi asali hachayil hazeh, that my strength and the strength of my hand made these riches for me, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, God is sovereign, and he is the one who gives you the capacity to do anything.
Right? Absolutely. Yep.
But at the same time, and this is where I think universalism goes too far, right? The most famous Mishnah is Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelek L'Olam Haba, that all of Israel has a place in the world to come. And then the next words are, and these are the people who don't. And and the Mishnah then gives a number of examples, which is 4 or 5 people out of the Bible.
Yeah.
And one of them is not Jewish, right? And so the question becomes, okay, so out of all the people in the Bible, this one Gentile doesn't have a place. It's Bilam, in case you were wondering.
Okay.
He's the only one, right? And the general consensus in Judaism is, yeah, he's the only one. It's like you have to work really, really hard to earn your damnation. And some people do, and they deserve it. But this idea of this God who's looking, there's this idea of the Antichrist, right?
Yeah.
This idea that God's looking to figure out who he can send to hell. Yay! It's like, no. That's not what God's trying to do. He's not trying to figure out a way of sending you to hell, right? And yes, you should be diligent and you should be careful. And I feel that, the Trinity is idolatry. And I do think falling into idolatry seriously poisons you. But at the same time, it's like, well, how much more clear could the Bible be about that which is most important? And I honestly, I say to Trinitarians all the time, I don't understand how you expect to stand before God and God says to you, how many times did I tell you one God? and your answer is going to be what? Right? It's like, I don't understand it, especially because there's that line where Jesus says you have to be like children, right?
Mhm.
And what exactly that means, right? But for me, that means that your theology should not be so, so involved and because you can rationalize literally anything. I mean, to the point where monotheism is rationalizing three gods, right? It's like you can rationalize anything, and there isn't this simplicity, right? Yes, I love the deeper meanings, and of course I love the drushas, and I love all, I'll discuss theology with you forever, but the simple meaning, that surface level, that God who, says the 10 Commandments, and it's like, well, duh, right? But then people will rationalize why they should kill people.
Yeah.
And then people rationalize why this is fine and that is fine. And it's like,
So this is where I'll probably, I agree with you, and this is where I'll bring in, and I'll say I appreciate Sam in talking about these things. Sorry, I'm drinking a LaCroix, which gives me burp. But God, so to your point, God is one and there's one God. I think that's true. And I think within a because I'm even uncomfortable with this, because I hear it. I have you and Sam, mainly Sam, because I've interacted with Sam so much in my consciousness Congress, that when people start saying things like Jesus is God or whatever, I hear Sam's voice in my head all the time. And I think people are really, especially in the early church, I think people are very careful about talking about this, even within the Nicene Creed, we believe in, we believe in one God, the Father Almighty, and in the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The language is very particular. And I think within the teaching of the church, as you go on further, I don't think that it's theologically incorrect to say that Jesus is God. But what that means is very nuanced and very complex, and gets into these very esoteric debates that relatively no one understands, because it gets into energy essence distinctions and all this old stuff that's been worked out in the church tradition. But I would say, to your point, there is one God. Absolutely.
I haven't been able to verify this myself. And of course, if you read it on the internet, it must be true. But there supposedly Justinian's code, right, made it illegal for Jews to recite the Shema because they thought, so in the Byzantine Empire, right, so Christianity actually made the recitation of the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4, illegal because it was considered a refutation of the Trinity.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not saying that that's not true. I mean, I don't know. But like that's just weird, because like why would a Christian, I mean, of course you have to affirm the Shema. Like I don't, how could you not, being a Christian? I mean, it's just weird, unless you're like some weird Jeffersonian Christian that's just picking and choosing things. And so
Well,
like, I
you
mean,
notice
everything.
the
Go ahead.
Shema is nowhere in any Christian liturgy. There are offices that Catholic religious are supposed to say, and on Saturday night they say it once. That's the only place the Shema shows up in all of Christian liturgy.
Yeah.
And I was floored, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a beautiful prayer. I mean, and I love it. I mean, I mean, there's nothing. So like even that, like, let's just grant that all that's true and that happened in the Byzantine Empire. I don't see it as a refutation of the way that I understand the Trinity at all, because really there is a very simplistic way to understand the Trinity. And I this is where I would be on your team and Sam's team. Like when you're talking to egalitarian Trinitarians, I don't think it makes any sense, because, and I don't think they can make sense of it either, because they will say things like God the Father is God, Jesus the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, which I think is true. But then when you ask them to talk about like what that means, because like, I mean, they can maybe draw you the simple triangle of like Father, Son, Spirit, and is not, and like they've maybe seen that in a PowerPoint sometime, but like they can't walk you through what all that means. And I think it's important to, in my understanding, what that's basically getting at is, this is what the early church was working out with all this like homoousia, like one substance, one essence that they all share in. But then like Maximus the Confessor, the essence is intrinsic to the Father and flows out. So he is pure essence, and they all partake in that, but they are not equivalent. Like, I mean, by definition, that's very simple. It's just like the Son cannot be the Father, and the Father cannot be the Son. Like, I mean, that's just,
Well,
of course.
this is where I have to say my most inflammatory line, which
Okay.
is Trinitarians don't believe that Jesus is God. They don't even believe he's a second-rate teacher. Because if you want to tell me that Jesus as God came to earth to teach us something, how about a single parable about the Trinity? How about the formulation that the church was supposed to, and this is where Sam's whole thing comes from, which is, okay, the church had to work all of this out. Why wasn't this fundamental of Christian religion, and why didn't it come out of Jesus's mouth? Jesus is the word of God, right?
Well, so part of that, I think, I mean, is that it's not, it is that a little bit, I think, teachings are, I mean, Jesus taught in a way. Jesus was never like, where was Jesus ever elucidating like the proper metaphysic? Like that's not what Jesus was doing. He didn't talk that way at all. He was, I mean, number one, he
talked like a rabbi.
Yeah. And it's not that what he was saying wasn't profound or deep, or, I mean, no one's been written more about based on what he said than probably almost anyone, And so
no, see, that's the thing. I think Paul is far more written about based on what he said than Jesus.
Well, Paul, I mean, yeah, Paul's been written about a lot too, but I'm just saying Jesus has been written about a lot, but it's not because he was like laying out like a theological metaphysic.
I disagree. I think he was laying out a theological metaphysic. That's, I mean,
my point is like, my point with all that is to say that Jesus was, to be a Christian is to manifest Christ to the world. I mean, I almost think that's probably the easiest way to talk about what a Christian is. Being a Christian is manifesting Christ to the world. It's Christ in me. And I think the way that you do that, it's the same way with me teaching my kids. I don't get my kids to love each other and to have proper behavior by teaching them philosophy. Like, that's just not, I mean, that's not what I do. That's not how you teach a child. That's not how you teach any human being. None of us do the right thing because we have the right formulas in our head. Having the right formulas in your head doesn't make you a good person. And so I think
how very Jewish of you.
I mean, I think that's maybe, like, I think that's right. And here's the thing, I was going to add this earlier too, because I think the Judaism and law stuff, and I don't know a ton about this. I heard N.T. Wright, you've maybe run across him, and now that you've been in
I'm not a huge fan, yeah.
Yeah, but he has one of his students, and I can't remember her name right now. She's a PhD theologian, but she wrote a book or a paper or something on this where it had to do with, like, it was just talking about the dynamics that were going on in the New Testament with the Judaizers and the Gentiles and early Christianity and everything that was happening. And so I don't know. I think in the early church, this is my understanding of it, is that for a Jewish Christian, yeah, of course you still need to keep the law. You're a Jew.
I mean, the early Jewish Christians, until they were killed out, believed that, and that was the big fight that they had with Paul.
Yeah, but I don't think that it was, but I think the problem with, at least my understanding with the Judaizers, is that they were saying Gentiles need to keep the law. And no, they don't. They're Gentiles.
Okay, so this is the thing. What the word Judaizer, as far as we can tell, is not actually referring to Jewish Christians. It's referring to Gentile Christians who believed that they needed to convert to Judaism to be Christians. Okay, so there are terms, specifically the word God-fearers. Okay. So it's possible that as many as 50% of the people who attended synagogues during the time of Jesus at that time were not Jewish. And this is something that has actually started showing up again, but 2,000 years ago, when it was Judaism or paganism, there were, and it wasn't like the pagans had scripture or had these teachings or that Judaism did, so that even the pagans, even if they weren't converting to Judaism, they were very, they would come to the synagogue. They were, in a sense, members of the synagogue. I mean, to the point where we actually have like names, right? And from some of the synagogues that have been dug up, and like half of them are not Jewish, right? And so there were, and it's funny, like I have to explain it to people. There are now some, not a small number as far as Jews go, like there's 2.5 billion Christians. So a very small percentage of Christians is a huge percentage of religious Jews. There's maybe, even if you include non-Orthodox religious Jews, there's maybe 2 million Jews who are religiously Jewish, right? So there may be as many as I mean, the numbers I've seen, as 100,000 of Noachites, who are people whose religion is Orthodox Judaism, but within Orthodox Judaism, they are Gentiles.
Okay.
And this existed 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's starting to exist again. And so when in the Greek Bible, it talks about God-fearers and Judaizers, right? These were two groups of Gentiles some of whom believed that Gentiles should convert to be Jewish, especially as Christians, and some which were, no, we believe in God, right? We're God-fearers. We believe in the Jewish God, but that doesn't mean we have to be Jewish.
Yeah.
And Pharisaic Judaism, at the very least, and early Christianity, right? That's the whole thing with Acts 15 was like, no, you don't have to be Jewish to be a good person, right? There's nothing that says, that you eating pork is a sin, right? So and this is the fight, whereas I think in retrospect, most Christians, when they're reading about these Judaizers, they hear Judaizers and they think, oh, well, these must have been Jews, right? And there's that whole thing in John of like the veil ripping, right? The veil of the temple ripping, and like Judaism was not for Gentiles, right? So like I've certainly seen Christians who kind of think that if they walked into an Orthodox Jewish synagogue, they would get, and somebody found out they were Christian, they would get kicked out, which that would only happen if you came in trying to evangelize, right?
I might kick them out.
Look, if you're trying to evangelize at my synagogue, right?
Yeah.
That I understand, but it's like, no, you're perfectly welcome to our synagogue if you want to show up, right?
Yeah.
We don't evangelize, and we don't think Orthodox Judaism doesn't think you have to. I was actually, you'll appreciate this. So I was just reading about this. There's a Chabad rabbi in Nepal, right? And he's there for the Israeli tourists. And this was like 8 years ago. And this naked 11-year-old beggar kid comes up to them, and they kind of adopted him, right? So everybody starts asking, well, is he going to convert? And in the articles from 2013, like the rabbi's like, no, he's not. And his name was Bim. And he's like, no, my name is Binyamin and I'm going to convert. And like the rabbi's been like, it was kind of like, maybe, right? And was like, no, we're helping him to help him. We're not helping him to turn him into a Jew.
Yeah.
Right. And then I was wondering what happened to him. So right before we started talking, I actually found his Facebook, right? And he's not Jewish. He's not, it's funny, like he's talking, I guess, in Nepalese to other people, and he's into parkour, and like he's got his whole life, you would never know that he was adopted by a Orthodox Jewish rabbi, except for some of the pictures on his Facebook have like likes by these real either Hebrew names or stuff, or like what he has this picture of himself when he was a kid, with one of his older brothers holding him, and like he tagged his brother, and like so he's like his brother, like and it's like these cute little, oh well, you're living your life as whoever you are, and he's like into parkour and stuff. He's not in any way right Jewish. And it was like he still has a relationship with them, and it's like,
yeah,
but that's not part of it. Yes, these are people who have gone, I guess you would call them missionaries. They've gone all the way across the world to Nepal, and apparently when they adopted him, his owners, the people who had him begging on the street for them,
Mm-hmm.
demanded a price, and they actually had to buy him off, right,
Yeah.
out of slavery, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the 99.9% of Christians would say, oh, then he must be a Christian. If he did that with Christian missionaries, there would be an expectation of like, well, he's been redeemed for Christ or something, right?
Of conversion or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like, the kid was gung-ho when he was like 11, and the rabbi was like, wait. And apparently, when he got a little older, they were like, okay,
Yeah.
you go live your life and be a good person. You don't just because we helped you doesn't mean you need to grow a beard and start wearing tzitzit,
Yeah.
And it was just really interesting looking at the pictures and the comments on his Facebook.
Yeah. No, I think that's I love that. I actually love that about Judaism. That's that really is my understanding too of how Orthodox Christianity is also. I mean, it's almost exactly like that. It's not that's one of the tenets of I think in the popular understanding of Christianity and American Christianity and evangelicalism, that's like, I don't know, there was an article written a while ago that wrote on like some guy wrote an article or wrote a book maybe where he came up with like 5 core tenets of evangelicalism, and one of them is conversionism. Like that's just, you have to, however people consider that, get people to take the Romans road, say this prayer, invite Jesus into your heart, whatever. There's some formula that, depending on whatever group you're in, has that, you're trying to get people to do, like recite this creed, say these magic words, be in our group, like whatever metric I need to have you get in my group. And Orthodoxy really isn't that way, and Judaism isn't that way. And I think you understand this. So like when I talk to evangelicals about that, and I wouldn't have understood at one point, or like if I was trying to talk to my mom about that or something, she'd be like, well, don't you, I mean, in their mind, it's almost considered like to be evangelical, to be to want people to convert, but it's not even that. It's not even wanting people to convert, because this is the thing about Orthodoxy or Judaism. Like I'm sure you as a Jew, or I'm sure this rabbi, they don't necessarily like, there's no problem. I don't think they're not like, no, we don't want you to convert, but it's just like it's a recognition that like it shouldn't be fast, it shouldn't be cavalier, you shouldn't rush into it. Like it's kind of like what you were saying, like, just hang out. Just because we helped you doesn't mean you have to convert. Like don't do this based on some like raw emotionality, like hang out, live your life. We can have a relationship, we can talk. It doesn't mean like if you don't jump onto my team right away, I'm going to disregard you, but like someday down the road, like if you want to become Jewish, they'd probably be like, fine, that's fine. We'd love that. That's great. But like, it's just not there's no, and this is the negative way to say it, but there's no like manipulative kind of cajoling, weird, I don't know.
Have you read the articles I've been posting from the various messianic, well, there are these Christians who go undercover in Hasidic neighborhoods, and this has happened several times where people who aren't Jewish go to a Jewish community and they pretend that they are, and like they get involved, and they're going undercover in order to, no thank you. By the way, I let me know when you need to go, because we can stop.
Yeah, we can finish up your stories. I probably need to wrap it up relatively quickly. Yeah.
So they go undercover because they want to get into these insular Jewish communities in order to spread the word of Jesus.
Right.
right? And honestly, I mean, I can't think of anything more threatening than actually doing things like this, of like actually befriending people on false pretenses in
Yeah. Right.
order
Yeah.
to, right? And but these people will quote, Paul says, I'm running to win. I'm not boxing against shadows, right? I'm
Right.
trying to win here, right? And if you genuinely believe that, if I really believed that you were going to hell, I would be
Hmm.
working a lot harder to try to save you from hell and eternal damnation,
Yes.
and I love that about the evangelicals who are worried about my soul and they want me to know Jesus because they don't want me to burn in hell forever.
Right.
I just find it really, really weird that they don't think God is actually, the one who's, first of all, that they think God would, I don't think God would damn someone even when you go up to the judgment seat and he said, I said one, right?
Yeah.
And I think you're probably going to squirm there. I don't think he's going to say, well, damn you, right?
Mm.
It's like these people who have this, it's funny, like they accuse Judaism of being legalistic,
Hmm.
but then, okay, last story. Did you hear about this Catholic priest that he found out, like there was a videotape of his baptism, and the person who baptized him, instead of saying, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, said,
Hmm.
we baptize you in the name of the Son, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Okay. Yeah.
And this went to the Vatican. The Vatican said, yeah, um, your baptism was null. So
Hmm.
your ordination was null. So all the sacraments you've performed are null. So all the weddings and we had somebody on our server who had to get married again because
Really.
he had been married by this priest who, because this person said we instead of I, he wasn't a Christian. And I was like, never in my life have I heard anything so legalistically insane. And I was an ultra orthodox, like I was living in Mea Shearim, right? I was living in the midst of Orthodox Judaism to the
Hmm.
point where like uh, I was having dinner with a friend at a couple's house, Hasidic couple,
Yeah.
right? So it was just the three of us. The woman had her own table, right? So the three of us men were sitting at one table and she was sitting at the other, and we were sitting there talking, but she was keeping
Yeah.
that separation,
Right.
right? So really, really legalistic,
Hmm.
but I can never imagine like a rabbi ever saying, oh, well, all these people, their weddings are completely null because of this, wrong word. It was just astounding to me. And like Christians then call Jews legalistic. It's like, really?
Yeah. Well, right. I don't know. So number one, the undercover like Jew evangelism stuff sounds really gross. Um, no, and I haven't been following those stories. I mean, if they're on the Discord, I'm not on the Discord very much. But it's yeah, it's the well, what was the you quoted a Bible verse in the midst of that, and I had a thought about it because it was very much like I don't know. And I thought of Jesus, the whole like, be careful you who judge, for in your judgment you condemn yourself, for you practice the same things. And
Which is in the Talmud.
yeah, it's a very, I think, I don't know, judgment is one of my favorite passages too, is in St. James, when he says, so speak and so act as to those who are be judged under the law of liberty. Because judgment, or what does he say? Like, and it's a passage that goes on to say, like, mercy triumphs over judgment. And I don't know. It's funny because we can so often act in. It goes back to what you were saying earlier. There are so many Christians that you see that just, and it's also that just don't look or portray what you perceive to be Jesus at all, or even Gandhi also said that, like, I love your Jesus, I don't love these Christians. It's I don't know, it's a sad irony. And I understand I guess the last thing I would say, probably, and then I should probably go, is I do understand, like,
End on a good note. End on a good note. Say something good.
Penn Jillette has said this, and it's essentially the same thing that you said. Like, I understand the sentiment of wanting to convert people to Christianity, and like any religious people, because he's a prominent atheist, Penn and Teller, Penn Jillette, the magician. Yeah. And I like Penn Jillette a lot. And he's like, if you really believe what the things that you're saying you believe, well, you would want me to believe them too. And so I understand that sentiment, but I have some issues with it, because I have the belief and I have the experience that I don't think that's how belief works. I don't think belief is something that's voluntary. I think you believe things almost involuntarily at times. You don't really control what you believe. You're compelled to believe things. And I think you can affect that by how you live your life and the choices that you make and things, because ultimately I think belief happens by mimesis. And so, like, the people that you admire, the people that you trust, the people that you love, I think we essentially believe the same things as people that we admire largely. And so, I understand that sentiment in evangelicals, I guess. And I think it's a beautiful sentiment, but it can become a really, I don't know, I guess I would just caution people to be very, I don't know, it's the take the log out of your own eye. And it's be very careful to clean your own room. And I wouldn't even encourage people to judge themselves, but if you're going to judge someone, start with yourself. I think even judging yourself can be dangerous. And so the whole idea of conversionism, so like even this with me and you, like, I don't have, it's funny how I've changed, because like I truly don't have almost any desire at all to get you to think that you believe the same things that I believe. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care at all. And it's not because I don't care about you, or I don't value you, or I don't want you to have a right relationship with God, or any of that. It has nothing to do with that. I just don't think that's how it works. And I think all that we can do as human beings is be really honest with ourselves, root out our own self-deception and hubris and lies and duplicitousness and false belief and the lies that we tell ourselves. That's probably the first thing that we should do. And then honestly speak the truth and what you really believe and what you really think, in as much as you can do that. And love people. And I don't know, leave just the kind of like rationalist conversionism that makes people adopt the kind of false pretenses to do that. I just can't even believe it. I really can't believe it, because like I think of those people, those Christians doing that, and say you secretly get a Jew to adopt your belief structure. Like, you're probably going to ruin their life. You're probably going to ruin their family's life. you're probably gonna create so much pain and trauma for this well-intended thing. Like, is that really, is that the healthy doctrine? Because even St. Paul, like sound doctrine in Greek could also means like healthy life. So like, that's what you're trying to do? Like, I don't know. I mean, it's really, I guess I would just caution people to be sure you're serving Christ, or be sure you're serving God, and not an ideology that's going to end up hurting people more than, if you want to really love people, just love people. Don't try to manipulate them to adopt your abstractions.
Yeah. Love, love without condition, unconditionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably a good note to end on.
Yeah.
We could agree on that. We'll agree on that proposition.
I love you, Luke.
Yeah, I love you too, Jacob. I really do. I really appreciate you and your presence. And I mean, it takes a special person and a special temperament to do what you do. And I mean, and I know you get into beef with people every once in a while on the Discord, but part of that's just your personality, and it's fine. I think you're what would be the word? Invaluable asset to the community, for sure.
Okay, now you're gonna make me cry.
Well, I mean, it's true. It really is true. You, Sam, I mean, it's just the diversity of this community is wonderful, and you are a key component of that.
The honesty of the community, I think, because there really is. I hope that I'm maintaining the room for, and I sometimes feel like, I have to maintain my position so that people feel that they can, because there are certainly other people on the server who, like Sam says, they are secret Unitarians, and there are, and
Yeah.
they are.
You mean like closeted?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. I don't know. Like, that's my, yeah, I never want this community to become so ideological and tribal that people can't be honest about what they really think.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay.